Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's demo about using emission factors with the AERMOD model. Today, actually, we'll be discussing two related concepts, which is the emission factors and also hourly emission rate files. We'll go over them in that order, actually. First, I'll tell you about how the emission factors work and what those are, how to enter them into the model using the B software as an example. And then after that, we'll also go over setting up the emission rate files. Okay, so what is an emission factor? It's actually a number that is used to determine the emission rate for a model run. Ordinarily, what you would do is ordinarily AERMOD just takes the source emission rate that you've defined when you've entered a source and uses that to model the source. With the emission factor, you'll actually calculate the emission rate as it runs the model. Emission factors can be applied to a source, a group of sources, or all the sources in the model if you want to do that. Typically, they're applied to just one or a few sources. And the point of using them is that now you don't have just one emission rate for the whole model. Or, I'm sorry. You don't use one emission rate for the source. You can have a varying emission rate that depends on the factors that we'll go over next. So this gives you just more flexibility in modeling the emission rates versus the default setting. Typically, to use the factors in AERMOD, you'll need to take 3 steps. First is to select the model sources that you want to apply these factors to, and then select an option for how many factors you're going to have in the model. The ones that are typically used are listed here. Typically, the emission rate can vary by hour of day, by season, by month, or sometimes by wind speed, although that's pretty rare. There are other options such as by season and hour of day, or by month and hour of day, but they're more as well. So that's the second step. Once you've selected a source or a few sources, you also select how many factors you will have, how many emission factors you will have, and then enter the factors themselves into the model. So now we're going to go into Beast and run an example where we're using emission factors. And in our example, we have a small facility with 4 sources, and 3 of them have emission factors. We will have point sources that operate during certain hours of the day, and we'll have another source that has been shut down. And we are modeling just one year of data here. So this is what that looks like. I'm going to zoom in on the facility here. And as you see, it has the area source over here, volume, and 2 stacks. So where you'd enter that is in the source options, and it's on this factors tab that's on the left here. So what I've done is 2 things. So step 1 is to select the sources that we want to use, that we want to apply the emission rates to. And to do that, I have double-clicked on a group name here, entered a name and selected my sources, which in this case is the 2 stacks. In the next case, it's the volume source. So once I do that, let's say for the stacks, I go over to the right and select the option, which in this case is the hour of day option. And then I enter the emission factor, which is essentially a multiplication factor. This is a value between 0 and 1. 0 means that the source is emitting nothing at all. 1 is that it's emitting at 100% of its, at 100% of the emission rate that has been defined in the source setup. So in this case, I have 75 grams per second for the first stack, and 100% of that is going to be 75. If I put in, let's say 50%, it will be 75 times 50%, which is 37.5. So in this case, I'm saying that it's going to be between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. So I don't care for a day of the week, which is one of these other options over here, where you can set it up so that so you have different factors depending on the day of the week, such as Monday through Friday in the weekend. In this case, I just have the hours of day, and in AERMOD, hour 1 is actually the hour between midnight and 1 a.m. And the hour that starts at 7 a.m. is actually hour 8. So done is, I've said we have 0. 0 is my emission factor for hours 1 through 7. So that's midnight to 7 a.m. And we have 1 for hour 8, which is starting at 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., going through 9 p.m., and then 0 for the rest of the hours in the day. For the volume source, which is the second set, it's a bit simpler. I've said that my emission factors are for the months of the year. And so that my factors are 1 January through August, and then 0 for the rest of the year. And once I do that, and run AERMOD, the model will take these emission factors into account when calculating the emission rate. So again, it's not just going to be just one emission rate for the whole year. It's going to be calculated based on the emission factors. So that's what you would do if you use the emission factors in the model. Now let's go ahead and examine the other way, which is with the emission rate files. So an emission rate file is just a text file that's where you input emission rates for each hour in the model. This gives you a little bit more, even more flexibility than emission factors, but now there's some additional setup to do that. And you can only have one of these files in the model. Now, as I said before, for emission factors, the factors used to calculate emission rates based on the source rate. But if you use the file, it's actually not going to calculate anything. It's just going to take the emission rate that's in the file and use that directly. And just as with emission factors, this can be applied to one or more sources in the model, or possibly all of them. And also now you can vary not just the emission rate, but other parameters such as stack temperature and stack exit temperature and velocity for point sources. So this gives you again a lot more flexibility as to what the emission rates will be that will be input into the model. So if you want to create one of these files, it has to have a certain format. And that is, again, it's a text file, and each line of the file will have information about one source and an hour. And I'll show you an example a little bit later. The source must be in the same order as defined in your input file. And also, one other important thing is that the dates there in the hourly emission rate file must be the same as your dates in the metadata file. And actually, if in your metadata file you are also using the option to model just certain dates and times within the year, that doesn't matter. Your emission rate file still needs to cover the whole year if your metadata file covers the whole year. Even if you're modeling only part of it using these start and end options for metadata. So let's go ahead and go through an example of how to set that up. And the typical steps here are a little more complicated, but again, you will need to select your model sources for which the emission rates apply. And then typically just create an Excel file with all the data that goes into the file. And then you would enter emission rates and possibly the other parameters in Excel, modify those in Excel, and then copy the data and paste it into a text file. So let's go through the example with the same facility that we've seen before, except now that I'm going to say that my area and volume sources, those emission rates are going to be defined within just the regular way, but the emission rates for the point sources are going to be defined through this file. So to do that, I would go to Source Options again in Beast and go to the File tab. By default, the file is empty, so I need to uncheck this checkbox and say Select Sources, which I've already done. In this case, it's going to be the two stacks, and also the emission file just as information for those two stacks. After that, I would need to enter the file name, and then one thing that the Beast software allows you to do is to generate this rate file for you, so that you can just import that into Excel and so that you don't have to start from scratch in Excel. So I'll go ahead and do that. My year in the metadata file is 1990, so I have selected the year 1990 on the left here. And I'm going to go ahead and say generate the file. And once I click OK, it will do that. And now I will open that in Excel. Okay. Now Excel actually asks me to import the data. It will say that it is space delimited, which it is. So I'm going to have several columns separated by spaces. And then say finish, and that brings the data into Excel. And before we go ahead and enter the emission rates, let me point out what each of the columns are. It's the year, month, day, and hour. And as you see, for each hour, let's say this is hour 1, and then we have hour 2. For each hour, we have the sources we selected in the same order. So stack 1, stack 2, stack 1, stack 2, and so on. The next one is the emission rate in grams per second. Then this is the temperature in Kelvin, and exit velocity, again, in meters per second. And if you had an area source or some other point sources here, Again, all the units in this file are in metric units. So in this case, the emission rate is in grams per second. And you see it goes from January 1st, hour 1, all the way down to December 31st, hour 24. And now the next step that I can do is just to enter emission rates. So for example, I will enter 35 grams per second here for both stacks for the first day. And in an actual modeling project, of course, I would modify the rates for the whole year. But in this game, I'll just do it for the first day. So now I'm actually not going to save the file. What I'm going to do is just copy everything in it and paste it into Notepad and create a new file. And when I do that, all these columns are separated by tabs. But what the AERMOD model needs is for them to be separated by spaces. So I'm going to replace the tabs with spaces. And now the file is ready for the AERMOD model to use. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. I believe we called it emissions.txt. So okay. So let's try something. So close that one. And there we go. So now the file is ready to go. It has the new emission rates of 35 grams per second. And now whenever you run the AERMOD model, it will be picked up and used by the model. So again, those steps were to generate a file edited in Excel, edit the emission rates in Excel in grams per second, and then make sure that that data file is selected in Beast. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you for watching. And now I will go ahead and take questions.